A black luxury sedan screeched to a stop in the hospital parking lot just after midnight. The driver slammed the door so hard it echoed between the concrete walls. Nurses walking past turned their heads. Inside the car sat a woman in wrinkled blue scrubs, her eyes heavy from exhaustion, her hands still trembling from a 16-hour shift in the emergency room. The man standing outside the car looked furious. His voice cut through the quiet night. "Do you have any idea what this car costs?" he shouted. "People like you shouldn't even touch something like this." A few people stopped walking. Someone lifted their phone and started recording. The nurse didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked up slowly and said something so calm, it made the entire parking lot fall silent. Because the millionaire yelling at her had no idea who she really was, and within the next 24 hours, that mistake would become the most humiliating moment of his life. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, make sure you click the subscribe button so you never miss stories like this. Emily Carter was 32 years old, and most people at St. Matthew's Hospital knew her as the nurse who never complained. The one who stayed late when shifts ran long. The one who quietly helped younger nurses when things became overwhelming in the emergency room. But outside those hospital walls, Emily's life was much harder than anyone realized. 3 years earlier her mother had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving Emily responsible for her younger brother Ryan, who was still finishing college. Medical bills filled a small stack on their kitchen counter at home. Some nights Emily would stare at those envelopes long after midnight, wondering how she would manage another month. That evening had already been the worst shift she'd worked in years. 3 emergency cases had arrived back to back. 1 patient survived. 1 was still in surgery. And 1 didn't make it. Moments like that stayed with nurses long after the shift ended. By the time Emily walked out of the hospital doors that night, she felt like her body was running on the last bit of energy she had left. All she wanted was a quiet ride home. Her rideshare driver had texted that he was arriving in a black sedan waiting near the entrance. When Emily stepped into the parking lot, she saw a black luxury car parked under a streetlight. Without thinking twice, she opened the passenger door and sat down, letting out a tired breath as she leaned back in the seat. For a moment she closed her eyes, grateful just to sit still. But the car didn't move. A minute passed. Then another. Suddenly the driver's door opened. That was when Daniel Whitmore returned to his vehicle. Daniel was 38 years old and known throughout the city's business community as a brilliant but extremely demanding tech entrepreneur. Just a year earlier he had sold his cybersecurity company for tens of millions of dollars. His success had made him confident. Some would say too confident. When he saw a stranger sitting in his car, he immediately assumed the worst. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded. Emily opened her eyes, confused for a second before realizing something was wrong. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I thought this was my ride." But Daniel wasn't interested in explanations. His frustration only grew louder. "You thought it was your ride?" he repeated. "You don't just climb into someone else's car." A few nurses passing by slowed down to watch. A hospital security guard stepped closer. Within moments a small group had gathered around the scene. Phones appeared in several hands, quietly recording everything. Emily stepped out of the car slowly, trying to steady herself after the exhausting shift. "It was an honest mistake," she said. But Daniel shook his head in disbelief. "That's not the point," he snapped. "People think they can just take whatever they want these days." The security guard, a man named Carl who had worked at the hospital for years, recognized Emily immediately. He had seen her countless nights walking through the emergency entrance after long shifts. "Sir," Carl said cautiously, "she works here." Daniel didn't seem to care. "Then she should know better," he replied. His voice grew louder, almost as if he wanted everyone nearby to hear him. Maybe calling the police will help her remember that other people's property isn't free for the taking. The word spread through the small crowd like a ripple. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One nurse whispered quietly to another, "She looks like she can barely stand." Emily's shoulders dropped slightly, not from fear but from pure exhaustion. She rubbed her eyes for a moment and then reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone. Without saying anything else, she typed a quick message. Just 5 simple words: "Can someone come outside please?" She sent the message to a number saved in her contacts under Dr. Harris. Then she slipped the phone back into her pocket and waited. Carl hesitated before calling for assistance. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him. But Daniel insisted again. "Call the police," he said. Within minutes a patrol car would be on the way. Meanwhile the crowd had grown larger as more hospital staff stepped outside to see what was happening. A young visitor standing nearby whispered to his friend, "This is going to end up all over the internet." He was right. One of the videos had already been uploaded, and views were climbing quickly. Daniel paced beside his car, still irritated, glancing occasionally at the people recording him. Emily remained quiet, her arms folded gently as she leaned against the side of the vehicle. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Inside the hospital building, Dr. Melissa Harris was finishing paperwork when her phone buzzed. She read Emily's message and frowned slightly. Emily rarely asked for help unless something was truly wrong. Dr. Harris stepped outside immediately. When she reached the parking lot and saw the police cruiser pulling in along with the growing crowd, she quickened her pace. One officer approached Daniel while another spoke briefly with Carl. "What seems to be the problem here?" the officer asked calmly. Daniel gestured toward Emily. "She was sitting in my car like she owned it," he said. Emily explained again that she thought it was her rideshare vehicle. The officer nodded, understanding that misunderstandings like this happened more often than people realized. But before the conversation could continue, Dr. Harris called out from across the lot. "Emily?" Everyone turned toward the sound of her voice. She walked straight toward the group, her white lab coat catching the light from the street lamps. "Is everything all right?" she asked Emily quietly. Then she looked at Daniel. Her expression changed. "Sir," she said calmly, "you might want to reconsider how you're handling this situation." Daniel gave a short laugh. "Why? Because she works here?" he asked. Dr. Harris shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "Because that nurse you're yelling at just saved someone's life tonight." The crowd fell silent again. Daniel shrugged dismissively. "Good for her," he said. "That doesn't change what happened." Dr. Harris looked directly at him and spoke carefully. "It might when you realize whose life she saved." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" he asked. Dr. Harris took a slow breath. "About an hour ago," she said, "a man collapsed inside this hospital from a sudden cardiac arrest. The team nearly lost him." Several people in the crowd leaned closer, listening. Emily noticed something unusual in his chart and pushed for a treatment that gave us another chance. That decision brought him back. Daniel's expression shifted slightly, curiosity replacing some of the anger. "And?" he asked. Dr. Harris looked at him steadily. "That patient was Robert Whitmore." The word seemed to hang in the air. Robert Whitmore was Daniel's father. The man who had invested his life savings to support Daniel's first startup years earlier when no bank believed in him. Without that support, Daniel's company would never have existed. Without that company, he would never have become a millionaire. The nurse he had just humiliated in front of dozens of people was the same nurse who had saved his father's life less than an hour earlier. Whispers spread through the crowd almost instantly. Someone quietly replayed the recording on their phone. Daniel looked at Emily again, but this time the anger had disappeared from his face. Instead, there was a realization slowly forming as he understood exactly what had just happened. He stepped forward slightly. "I didn't know," he began. Emily raised her hand gently before he could finish. Her voice stayed calm. "You didn't embarrass me tonight," she said softly. The parking lot was completely silent now. "You embarrassed yourself." Daniel stood there, unable to respond. Emily looked around at the people watching and then back at him. "Being tired doesn't make someone less worthy of respect," she said quietly. The words landed heavily. Several people lowered their phones. Even the officers standing nearby seemed thoughtful for a moment. The next morning the video had spread across social media faster than anyone expected. Millions of people watched the confrontation. News outlets contacted the hospital asking for interviews with the nurse from the video. But Emily Carter declined every request. That night she returned to work just like she always did. She checked patient charts, helped new nurses handle difficult cases, comforted families sitting in waiting rooms. Because for her, helping people had never been about recognition. It was simply the job she chose to do. Sometimes the people we underestimate the most are the ones quietly holding everything together. The tired nurse you pass in a hallway might have just saved someone's life. The quiet stranger sitting next to you might be carrying responsibilities you can't see. Respect costs nothing, but the lack of it can reveal more about a person than any amount of money ever could. If this story made you think or moved you in any way, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.